Every successful person in history has used leverage. I want to talk about why they use leverage, how they use leverage, but then there's the downside of leverage, which is why the economy is being brought down to a recession because of over leverage. I want people to understand leverage because I believe, especially if you come from places like I come from, we're not taught about leverage in a way that makes sense to us. I'm trying to make sure we all understand leverage and use it during these times because this is when people use leverage and become huge financially. People change their lives. So I want to make sure in this episode I break down leverage and how I've seen it work for highly successful people, how I've used it, and how I'm using it. There's basically four types of leverage. There's people leverage, which is what businesses do. They'll take 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, and be more productive. If you have a business where it's just one person, that business can only do a certain amount of things. If there's a business with 100 people, that business could do more. People is one form of leverage that businesses use. Money is a big leverage. This is where people fundraise, raise money for their ideas, and get investors using other people's money, or they borrow from a bank or other institutions to do things with money that they don't have. They leverage other people or institutions. Code is a big point of leverage. Code is one of the biggest tools humankind has ever created to leverage. If I create a website using code, I can leverage more eyeballs because if I have a sign on the street, only a certain amount of people can pass by and see it. By coding something, I can make millions of people see that same information. I can have millions and billions of people use my service or business because of code. Code is a major point of leverage. And then probably the most understood point of leverage is media. So even what I'm doing right now, when I create this content, I'm not just talking to one person. I could have the same conversation with one person or be on a stage talking to 100 people. But by using media, social media, broadcast media, this information could go to a billion people instantly. If you can use media leverage, we've never had an easier way of using that to amplify a message or put your ideas out there. That's a major point of leverage. So those are the four main points of leverage: people, money, code, and media. When we think about where we are in this world and with the economy, we've over leveraged. And when we over leverage as an economy and as a country, the government tries to bring down the leverage by making interest rates higher so people don't borrow as much, starts to make businesses lay off people because they've overhired, because they've over leveraged on people and money. There's no over leveraging on code or media, depending on what you think about the political landscape and how people can use media to amplify a message. I've never seen someone over leverage code or media yet, but I'm sure we'll see it eventually. Right now, the economy's in a very bad spot because companies have over leveraged. Many companies are starting to lay off thousands of people. Why did that happen? During the COVID crisis, people went online more, so companies started to say, okay, we need more people. If you were an online business like Amazon grew over 90% during COVID. They saw the influx of demand and started to hire a lot more people. There's issues with the future and how code will replace people with the AI movement. If you're a business owner or a person looking for a way to make money, are you going to choose code or people as your leverage point? That's going to be a big deal. If you look at the economy is actually driven by leverage. When you have a booming economy, the reason that's happening is because companies are able to borrow more. So what happens is they borrow more and they hire more people, they create more products. The economy is usually regular people are able to borrow more, buy more homes, buy more everything, and that starts to bring up the economy. But then we get to the dark side of leverage, which is once we've leveraged for too long, like what's going on right now, all stems from 2008. So it's a boom and bust system. In 2008, we over leveraged, right? The housing market busted, the stocks and everything started to explode because we were over leveraged at that point. So what happened was in 2008, major things happened. The government put some laws in place to not allow businesses, specifically banks, to leverage in a way that would some geniuses decided to use code to create Bitcoin, which would make it so governments couldn't put the people in the same type of situation as it's been putting people throughout history by printing more money and having boom and bust scenarios. So when I think about where we are, what happened was 2008, all the way from 2008, it's been a straight up leverage and COVID hits and made us drop down because nobody was working. To keep the economy growing, the government had to print more money and bring the interest rates to almost zero. So what happened was everyone leveraged, people leveraged, businesses leveraged even more. We were already at a high point of leverage. And then the COVID situation made everyone leverage even more. So of course there was gonna be some type of payback for that, and that's what we're dealing with right now with the economy about to drop. Many layoffs are about to happen. But the way you navigate these times is you just gotta understand what's going on. I remember my journey, I didn't understand any of this stuff. I just was a worker at first, but I started to understand leverage in a way. But one thing I did decide was at one point, I started getting more work than I could handle myself. People were giving me more than 24 hours a day worth of work. So I said, I can't do all this work by myself anymore. I need to find people to help me do this work. So the first one I started to understand was people leverage. I said, okay, these companies are willing to give me more than 24 hours worth of work. Why not leverage more people to get that work done? I'll make less money on those hours, but I will still make something because if a company was giving me $100 an hour and I could find someone to do the work for 50, 60, $70 an hour, I would still make $30 an hour without doing the work, but I manage the client relationship, I sell the client. That was that's what businesses do. So I said, "Okay, I'm gonna learn the business by leveraging people." So then I brought my business up to having about 20, 30 people doing hours of work that I couldn't do. It was 9 hours in the day for me to do all that work. But the business grew. And that's when I realized this is how people make money. The problem was service based businesses, they only leverage people. So they're not as profitable. People make a lot of money by creating businesses that are super profitable and they either sell them or keep service based businesses are not that profitable unless the margin is very high. Let's say I was charging $100 an hour and paying people $15 an hour, then that's a high margin business. But if you're paying people $85 and you're charging 100, you're making 15, that's not that profitable and it's really hard to run a business on a 15% profit margin. I intuitively started to learn that and I think everybody needs to start to learn this stuff. I believe everybody's going to have to start to understand these points of leverage and start using them because if jobs slow down, what are you going to do if you don't understand where it's going? Like there was a point in history where I was a freelancer and these boom and bust cycles, I didn't really understand them. I just knew they're going to start laying people off. So I need to figure out how I'm going to make money. I was doing code, but I think animation work will be more in demand right now. So I'm going to switch to pitching more animation work. I would just move back and forth between what I thought people wanted based on the economy in down markets. Advertising sometimes comes up because everybody was competing for the same dollars. So the advertising industry sometimes booms during bad economies. So I would say I'm going to go into advertising now, but I had to go through it a few times to start understanding that every industry has its own version of that. The real key is understanding the overall so you can not only navigate it for yourself in a bad economy, but also start to change your situation. In the 2008 recession, I created my second company where I said, I believe these companies are going to want to innovate, but they're not going to be able to because they don't have the internal staff to do it. So I said, I'm going to leverage my experience and work with all these brands and agencies, and I'm going to offer a service to agencies, brands, startups, government agencies to help them innovate. So I created my second company, Mass Ideation, to go after these companies. In 2009, I had 30 employees during a bad recession because I was prepared and I had a solution I believed was good for the market at that time. Business goes up and down. As an agency, small margins, that business type I really didn't enjoy. I did good sales and everything, but I didn't like the way it was set up for my lifestyle. So I started figuring out how to do different things. I got to the point where I said, all right, I like the startup world, but how do startups leverage investor money? What startups do is they say, okay, I got this idea. Let me see how I can get an investor to give me the money to do it. I started to help people try to get investors to build their products because my company would build their products. If I can help this person with their great idea get an investor, they could pay my company to build it. So I started walking around with startup founders, talking to investors, and I realized those people are the top of the world. Their money powers the world. So I said, I need to understand how you become that person. I didn't understand these people were leveraging other people's money. The way that world works is an investor or a venture capital firm will get other people's money, pool it together, and then they find companies to put it into. Then they say, all we need is 10% of these companies to work out and we'll return the money you gave us. I learned all this and I started to deal with startup founders. That's when I created MetaBronx because I said, I want to help more companies. As a minority, we don't get taught this stuff. So I said, I really need to understand how the money flows from that investor to people like me that have good ideas. At that point, I started trying to help people. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was a startup founder with a great idea, and she couldn't get investor money. Then she became a politician because she couldn't make her startup work. I always think about what if that person would have raised startup funding? How different could her world have been and maybe the world? I see a lot of stories like that. Very smart people, but they don't understand that leverage point, how to make it work for them. This is where we created MetaBronx. And since then, we've helped companies raise over $15 million of investor funds to make ideas happen. That was the second path of my journey. Code is the third leverage point. When I was very young, I realized there was something about code that was different. Now that I'm understanding the people leverage, I understand the money leverage. When you look at the biggest companies and how scalable and big they become, they're doing this through code. If you're a person saying, okay, how do I navigate this crazy time? I'm not a developer, but you can look for opportunities to help companies that are using code as leverage because those are going to be the biggest companies. If you had an opportunity to work as a non technical person in a company that's leveraging code and a company that's not, I suggest you choose the company that's leveraging code because that company has the chance of being bigger. And now with things like Chat GPT, where now you can ask a robot code anything, it has become easier than ever to learn how to code. And I always tell people if you can learn even just a little bit about how to code, you could pretty much make anything. Because like even right now, I'm creating an app and I was a developer, so I'm able to manage developers. I'm able to leverage people that have that skill set easier because if I didn't have that skill set, it would be very hard for me to manage people that have it. And that's where understanding code will help you leverage it. Doesn't mean you have to do it yourself. You still can leverage people to leverage the code. But if you don't understand it at all, it becomes very difficult to do that. I do think code is probably the future biggest leverage point of humanity.